Hello and welcome back to the channel Zenin Fanfics. Today we are starting part 9 of the series, What If Villain Deku Became a Teacher at UA? If you enjoy this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more content in the future. The author of this story is Bloomer Bill from fanfiction.net. All the relevant links are in the description. Feel free to say hello to the author on their profile. Now, let's dive into the fanfic. Izuku helped Kaoru-kun run through turning his quirk on and off, which was still difficult for the young boy. Going under Kaoru-kun's quirk repeatedly certainly left Izuku in a daze, but he was sure that with enough exposure that Kaoru-kun's quirk wouldn't seriously affect him anymore. After successfully turning his quirk on and off 5 times, Izuku had him turn it back on and tried walking around the room, and they would also try to pick up some of the toys with varying results. But once an hour passed, Izuku took the tuckered-out Kaoru-kun home, making sure to inform her of what Kaoru-kun told him about the girl being mean to him. The woman thanked him, assuring Izuku she would be talking to the girl's parents about her behavior, and with that settled, Izuku went down to the docks to meet up with Yuri-san. The two enjoyed dinner together, and Izuku was happy that he only had to slip back into Japanese a few times. Feeling a bit proud, he was getting better at holding a conversation in Russian. They talked about his quirk mainly, and he got some more little figurines made from Yuri-san's ice, which Izuku adored since they were all adorable little animals. Izuku made sure to thank Yuri-san for the gifts before he left for his train. The next few days went on fine, though he had talked with his mom more since she was helping with payroll, and she needed to know more about how much he made and spent each day. He already kept track of that, so he just had to write up a document and send it to her by the end of each day. Mom had questions though, mainly about how he wanted to do things with his money, like if he preferred payouts in cash or checks. Though it pained him to say, Izuku had to admit things were a bit easier since he didn't have to crunch all the numbers himself. And even if Izuku would greatly prefer to handle all of it himself, he knew he had to do what was best for his students, and he knows he can trust his mom. He just wished it felt less like he was pushing his work off onto her. Mom didn't seem to be overwhelmed by doing the work on top of finishing up her 2 weeks. If anything, she still looked like she had the day they went to the zoo with his friends and was slowly getting better bit by bit with each video call. It must have been because she was given a lighter workload on her 2 weeks, since she called him as soon as she got off work at 2:30 p.m. He couldn't complain about it, though, when he would get to spend more time with her on Thursdays from now on. It was also kind of nice to come home to a dinner he hadn't cooked, and they talked a bit more about business before discussing the normal topics. How his students were faring in their studies, or how some heroes were destroying streets. When he went to bed that Thursday night, Izuku had checked in with his friends' group chat to make sure all their plans for tomorrow were still on, wishing them a good night before passing out. Ochako nervously picked at a loose thread on her skirt, staring at herself, anxiously wondering if the thrift store leggings would keep her warm enough, and was the skirt and t-shirt right to wear for training, or should she bring her PE uniform instead? She and Mizo-kun had been talking about meeting up to train since Izuku-kun first got them into contact with each other. She was a bit anxious about how they would train when she met Mizo-kun in person for the first time last Sunday, since he was so much bigger, but he really was the definition of a gentle giant, so that fear was quickly quashed. But Ochako was still worried about meeting up with the multi-limbed boy to train their quirks. She has never used her quirk outside of school counseling or at home. She could never afford to go to the nearby quirk center since it was private, and it would take too long to get to the government-run quirk center with how far it was. And she had never dared to use her quirk in public, having been too scared of getting a fine or a black mark on her record that could bar her from entering a hero school. But both boys had reassured her that it would all be above board and she wouldn't have anything to worry about. Izuku-kun went as far as to forward the section of the law that specified that quirk use was only illegal when in public spaces, and Izuku-kun explained quirk use was all right in privately owned areas so long as they had the property owner's permission. And Izuku was absolutely giving them his permission to use their quirks on his properties. "Ochako, dear?" She jumped with a squeak. Whirling around, she saw her mom. Oh, hey mom." She awkwardly chuckled, relieved. "Are you finished getting ready? You're going to miss your train if you don't leave soon." Her mom asked, and Ochako looked at the time on her phone. "Eep. You're right, Mom. I'll be back by dinner." "Love you, Mom," Ochako exclaimed, giving her mom a quick hug, then ran off for the station. Izuku had given her a detailed list of directions of how to get to Miso-kun's place safely if he was delayed and didn't meet her at the station. It had a lot of concerning things mentioned for her to avoid, so she hoped that Izuku wasn't late. The ride over wasn't that bad since it was getting warmer, still nippy with spring around the corner, but not bad enough for needing her coat. The other passengers were minding their own business, so she didn't have to worry about anyone bugging her. Actually, arriving at the station was a different story, as Ochako found herself feeling very out of place as she walked out of Sekiya Station and looked around for Izuku. When she didn't see him, she felt like she had swallowed a stone, and she timidly took out her phone. I wouldn't be a horrible person if I asked Miso-kun to come get me, would I? Ochako thought, hesitating on texting the boy, "Ochako-chan, over here." Izuku suddenly called, and she saw the brunette walking over to her. Ochako sighed, greatly relieved to see him. "Izuku, you're here," she said, and eagerly met him halfway to hug him. Izuku hesitated before hugging her back. Hi Ochako-chan. We should probably be going now. Don't want to keep Miso-kun waiting." Izuku replied as she pulled away. "Right, I can't wait to get started even if I don't really know what we could do," Ochako answered nervously, rubbing the side of her neck. "Oh, don't worry about that, Ochako-chan. I've already finished my work for the day, so I can supervise the whole thing. And I can give you some ideas to start with regardless of if you want to work with Miso-kun at first." Izuku assured, "We can even plan out what you want to try out while we walk if you want." He offered, and Ochako accepted it at once, wanting to do something to keep her mind off of her worries. They got pretty into it since Ochako almost tripped over her own 2 feet and would have landed face first if Izuku hadn't caught her as sorry Izuku. I should have paid more attention to where I was going." She quickly apologized, her face getting a touch red as she brushed herself off. Izuku just flashed her an understanding smile. "It's fine, Ochako-chan. I used to be tripped up by the cracks in the sidewalk all the time when I started coming to the south side. I should have warned you beforehand," he told her, and she blinked shocked, then looked around with her jaw dropping when she saw where she was. The south side?" she exclaimed disbelievingly as she took in the wrecked buildings and visible destruction, wondering how she could have missed it before. "Yeah, it can be a bit hard to get around if you aren't paying attention, so it would probably be best if you follow behind me closely. We shouldn't run into any trouble, but anything can happen," Izuku suggested, and Ochako didn't argue, resisting the urge to grab onto Izuku's arm. The anxiety waned some as most of the people they passed seemed to be relatively friendly, even if they looked utterly terrifying, but she still clung to Izuku's side since she had heard too many stories of girls like her going missing in the south side. Thankfully for her heart, Izuku got them to a much better-looking apartment building where Miso-kun was waiting for them in the same fluffy poncho he wore when they first met. He saw them approaching and waved. "Hi guys." Miso-kun greeted. "I've already got my things together, so we can go ahead to the center," Miso-kun commented, briefly showing them a duffel bag hidden under his poncho. "Great, Miso-kun, let's go then," Izuku replied, beaming, and the 3 of them began walking away towards somewhere else, with Ochako just following the 2 of them, unsure what to do with herself. "You okay, Ochako-chan? You're a little pale," Miso-kun quietly asked, having extended a hand-mouth over to her. She probably would have been scared by its appearance if she hadn't seen it come over to her. I'm fine, Miso-kun, just nervous because I haven't trained with anyone before," she told him, omitting her fear of the area itself since she didn't want to be rude. This was where Miso-kun lived, and Izuku didn't seem to be having the same problem she was with being in the south side. Mizo-kun nodded the little mouth. Yeah, I am too, but we can learn together, right? He responded. And don't worry, I know walking around here the first time can be unnerving, but you'll get used to it after a while. Mizo-kun added, having apparently picked up on the real reason she was anxious. Ochako became flustered, mentally crying in her head for being so easily read, and she would have hid her face in her hands if she wasn't afraid she would trip over the concrete again as they walked. The building they ended up going to wasn't in the same condition as the apartments, but it did look more stable than most of the crumbling buildings. This is the community center. It's not a registered Quirk center, but Mizo-kun owns it and has given everyone blanket permission to use their quirks here. We just go here instead of one of the ones outside of the district. Mizo-kun explained to her as they entered. Ochako nodded along, taking in the inside of the building, which was bare but much better than the outside. She followed the boys over to the side that didn't have chairs and tables. She had also noticed they weren't alone in the building, with a couple of other people puttering around or reading at one of the tables. Mizo-kun suddenly pulled off the poncho and she squeaked, covering her eyes and turning away from him. Oh, Ochako-chan, are you okay? Izuku asked. And she hesitantly peeked out from under her fingers and saw that Mizo-kun apparently had a backless tank top on underneath the poncho. Feeling embarrassed she had misunderstood, she quickly waved her hands. Why, yep, she exclaimed, nervously laughing it off. Okay? You said you wanted to see how your quirk works on other people. Would you be up for that, Mizo-kun? Izuku questioned, shifting the topic, and turned to the multi-limbed boy. Mizo-kun hummed. That should be fine, just let me anchor myself first. Mizo-kun requested, and Ochako watched as 4 more limbs sprouted from him and gained some unnerving-looking claws at the end of each of them. Then he dug his claws into the closest wall. Okay, ready, Ochako-chan, he announced with a thumbs up. She hesitated for a second, then placed her left hand on his arm. Her quirk activated and Mizo-kun's feet left the floor. But he didn't float away because of how he anchored himself. Feel anything off, Mizo-kun? Izuku inquired. Mizo-kun paused, tilting his head. It's weird being so light. Mizo-kun answered. But you don't feel nauseous or lightheaded? Izuku pressed, receiving a shake of the head in return. No, maybe a little off-kilter because I'm not used to zero gravity. I just need some time to recenter myself. Mizo-kun clarified. Okay, go ahead and try some climbing like this. Izuku instructed, and Mizo-kun went ahead, slowly crawling up to the ceiling. Things went all right after that. She would test her quirk with the small objects around the center to see if there was a way for her to control the amount of buoyancy, as Izuku called it, she gave something with her quirk. Ochako also tried to see if she could make one thing float and another heavy at the same time. Mizo-kun, on the other hand, worked on different ways he could change his extra limbs, and using his extra limbs to move like an animal could. Occasionally, he'd ask her to use her quirk on him because he wanted to get used to moving around in an altered state. Ochako was starting to feel herself relax with Izuku's continued commentary and suggestions to them both. But all of that loosening up was for naught when a loud bang shattered the calm atmosphere and she accidentally deactivated her quirk when she jumped, something she quickly realized was a grave mistake when she remembered Mizo-kun was under her quirk. Ochako snapped her head towards the direction of Mizo-kun and was just in time to see the boy's sudden and rough landing on 4 of his extra limbs. Everyone held their breath as Mizo-kun's limbs wobbled. I'm okay, Mizo-kun forced himself to say, and was clearly very shaken from the sudden fall. Ochako rushed over to him and was going to profusely apologize for almost dropping him on his head. But another gunshot loudly cut her off and making her jump again. Mizo-kun got to his feet, retracting his extra limbs, and pulled her into a hug, which she greatly appreciated since she could hear people yelling outside. Scared, she pressed closer to Mizo-kun and searched for Izuku only to freeze when she saw the greenette. Because Ochako could practically feel Izuku's anger rolling off of him in waves. Izuku, she timidly called, and the intensity of his anger lowered by a fraction, if that. I apologize, Ochako-chan. Mizo-kun, it seems there is something that has come up. Please excuse me for a second to deal with it. Izuku requested through gritted teeth. Not waiting a second, Izuku began walking towards the doors, his posture rigid, and she was going to call out for him to stop, but Mizo-kun scooped her up with his lower arms, causing her attention to go back to him. Mido-kun will be fine. He knows how to deal with them. Just focus on calming down Ochako-chan while he deals with whoever's outside. Mizo-kun told her as he carried her back over to the corner where their stuff was. Mizo-kun sat them down and sprouted another pair of arms to grab his poncho, which he wrapped around her. She felt very conflicted about this, wanting to go out and make sure Izuku would be okay, but unable to find the strength to pull herself from Mizo-kun's embrace or free herself of Mizo-kun's very soft and fluffy poncho. "Is this your first time being so close to a gang fight?" Mizo-kun asked, distracting her from the yelling, and Ochako wondered all but briefly just how many gang wars Mizo-kun had been around for him to be so calm about this. "Why, yes," she muttered, flinching when she heard someone screaming. Mizo-kun hugged her closer, rubbing her back with a spare limb. "It's okay to be scared, Ochako-chan. Very few people aren't scared the first time they experience a gang fight up close. We just have to wait for Mido-kun to sort it out," Mizo-kun said, trying to comfort her. Mizo-kun wasn't the best at it, but Ochako did appreciate him trying to support her. The next few minutes felt like hours as she waited for Izuku to return, and Ochako could never put the relief she felt into words when Izuku returned unharmed. Izuku flashed her a sheepish smile. "So sorry about that, Ochako-chan. That should not have happened. It must have been very scary, and Mizo-kun, and I totally understand if you'd want to go home early." Izuku offered, sounding sincerely sorry for something that was completely out of his control in her opinion. Ochako paused to consider going home and burying herself in blankets at home, something she was severely tempted to do, but a different thought nagged at her. How was she going to be a good hero if she broke down and ran away at the first sign of trouble? Even though she was aiming to join rescue work, the people she was going to be saving needed someone to be their rock during their rescue, just like Mizo-kun had tried to be for her right now, and she wasn't going to become any better at handling these kind of situations if she avoided them. So instead of taking the easy choice of leaving, she gave both of her friends the best smile she could manage. "That's okay, Izuku. I want to keep working on my quirk. So let's get back into it, yeah?" Ochako suggested. Izuku hesitated for a second, but nodded. "Okay, Ochako-chan, if you're sure." Izuku agreed, and Mizo-kun unwound his arms from around her so they could get back to work. Tamaki was having a bit of an existential crisis since he got his results, and Mirio's attitude has not been helping. His blonde friend has been practically smothering Tamaki with how proud he was of him getting second place, a fact Tamaki is still struggling to understand, much less comprehend. But it was there in black and white, so Tamaki would just have to somehow live with it. At least everyone else seemed to be just as baffled at how high he placed in the exam when they heard of it. That didn't stop Mirio from bragging about him to anyone that would listen, like a proud parent, something that superbly embarrassed him every time. Thankfully, it was the end of the term, so he didn't have to deal with it for long, but Tamaki would have preferred to not deal with it at all if he had things his way. But it all became much more real as he and Mirio began packing up his stuff so he could move in with Mirio. A large part of Tamaki really didn't like that he wouldn't be able to see his papa whenever he liked, but it was ultimately a small sacrifice in the grand scheme of things. Moving into Mirio's room was an adjustment, but he was coping with being exposed to Mirio's personality all day, and his father, Tagada-san, was just as kind if much more subdued. Tagada-san did always say that Mirio must have gotten his energy from his mother. The three of them had more than enough time to get to know each other and their habits over the course of the break. He also had help with his admittance paperwork from the two. Mirio especially was a big help in picking what he would need for his costume. Both men had seen his anxiety and had tried to encourage him, which was nice. He had also spoken to his mama a few times over the phone, and each time she never failed to mention how proud she was of him. However, come the beginning of the term in April, Tamaki had clung to Mirio the whole way over to Yua, muttering about all the horrible things that were going to happen to them once they got to the school. Mirio truly must have had the patience of a saint to put up with him at times like this, and was all the more reason he believed Mirio was going to be a great hero. Mirio even went as far as to sneakily give him a spider lollipop, which Tamaki didn't know he had bought. When did you? Tamaki questioned as he held the treat close to him. There were no stores nearby that stocked such items, and he would have noticed if they had ordered any packages of such a nature as his favorite candy. Though secret guilty pleasure was a much more fitting name for his love of candy with real insects. He hadn't even wanted Mirio to know, but the blonde had managed to find out. Mirio just chuckled back. There was a mutation specialty store a few minutes away by bike, and I figured there'd be no harm in checking it out to see if they had 'em. Mirio admitted. Tamaki sniffled as he began to lick away at the lollipop, getting misty-eyed. Hey now, Sonny, it's not that big of a deal. You deserve something nice for doing so well, you know. Mirio told him, ruffling Tamaki's hair. And maybe it wasn't a big deal, but Mirio going out of his way to get him something like this meant something to Tamaki. That the blonde accepted a part of him he knew most wouldn't, from what he remembered of his aunt's scolding. By the time they made it to Yua, Tamaki had managed to finish off the lollipop and was back to worrying about how he'll survive 3 years in the hero course. Mirio had to drag him along to make him keep going and into the massive, intimidating building. Mirio had been able to flag down an upperclassman to tell them how to find one, and then they were off with Mirio happily greeting anyone they saw along the way. It hadn't taken them long, as the first year's classes, excluding the support course, were on the second floor, and the upperclassmen's directions were spot on. Well, here's your stop, Sonny. It's just opening day, so you don't have to worry about anything except getting to know your classmates. And if you get overwhelmed, just tell the teach and they'll come get me, okay? Mirio said, trying to reassure him, but it only brought up the thing Tamaki had dreaded the most. The fact that he and Mirio were in separate classes. I'm going to throw up. Tamaki groaned under his breath, making Mirio laugh, and he gave him a playful hit on the back. That's the spirit, Sonny. And hey, who knows? Maybe you'll be in the same class as your partner. Mirio teased, waggling his eyebrows, causing Tamaki to turn bright red. Mirio, he croaked, and the blonde laughed heartily as he left to find 1B. Alone in the hall, Tamaki turned towards what had to be one of the largest doors he's ever seen in his life and gulped before he timidly pushed open the door. The room was mostly full, as he counted 15 people already seemed to be there, which made him feel even more nervous as he tried to quietly enter the room without being noticed. A mission in which he failed at, as he was spotted almost at once by one of the few people he recognized from the exam, and not for a good reason. He was met with a cold glare. What's a coward like you doing here? The girl hissed, hands on her hips, as she stalked closer to him. Tamaki stepped backwards as she was quickly getting into his personal space. I'm... He tried to speak. The girl test, don't bother lying. There's no way Yua would let a thieving coward like you into the hero course. She spat at him, and with everyone staring at them, it made Tamaki want to curl up in the corner and cry, I'm not. He tried to defend himself, only to jump when a massive hand with claws settled on his shoulder. Is there a problem here? A familiar voice with a lisp said, and upon looking back, Tamaki saw he had almost backed into the chest of the large lizard-quirked person he worked with during the exam, and his mouth went dry. The others in the class must have felt just as intimidated by the guy, because no one had dared to speak up. The boy's eyes were locked on the girl, harassing him. Move, he told her, and she huffed, sashaying away to a group of girls, clearly planning on bad-mouthing them. Tamaki would have moved too, but the clawed hand on his shoulder kept him in place. Golden eyes went down to meet his. Are you okay? He asked, head tilted to the side. Was this person worried about him? Shakily, Tamaki nodded, not trusting his voice to come out as any form of intelligent speech. He got an odd reptilian hum back in return. Do you know where you're sitting? He inquired, and Tamaki nodded. Good, let's sit. He replied, letting his hand fall from Tamaki's shoulder, and instead the guy's tail wrapped around Tamaki's wrist. Tamaki, unsure what to do, just let himself be dragged along before the guy stopped in front of the desk beside his own. "This is mine," his former partner informed, pointing to the desk like he feared. Great, not only was he in the same class as the mean girl, but he was forced to sit beside the guy he wrote most of the exam. Suddenly the lizard's head turned around and Tamaki turned around quickly, and he saw a girl with reddish-brown hair, the girl he had helped near the end of the exam. Her arm was outstretched, likely with the intention to tap his shoulder, but she had stopped because he turned around. She hesitated for a second before she coughed into her fist. "Sorry, I just wanted to thank you for coming to help me," she nervously told him, and clearly just as awkward about saying it as he was in hearing it. Wait, what? How am I supposed to respond to that? Gosh, why couldn't Mirio be in the same class? Tamaki bemoaned in his head. It's fine. It wasn't that big of a deal." Tamaki managed to stutter out, only to yelp when he was yanked away by the tail wrapped around his wrist. He would have wondered why if there wasn't another girl that would be right in his face if his partner hadn't pulled him back. "Hey, wait, are you Amajiki-chan? Tagata-chan told me all about you during the exam," the bubbly girl exclaimed, and she likely would have jumped at him again if his partner didn't use his tail to hold her at bay. Despite how flustered he was, Tamaki could sort of remember Mirio mentioning a girl he had met during the exam. Not that Tamaki could remember much of what Mirio said at the moment. "Refrain from invading his space," his partner requested, and while Tamaki didn't like being held so close to the other boy, he very much appreciated his partner keeping the excitable girl away from him. The girl pouted and was going to say something, but his lizard companion turned his gaze towards the door and said, "The teacher's almost here. We should get into our seats." The girls hesitated before reluctantly leaving for their seats. With them gone, the lizard released him and moved to his seat beside Tamaki's, with Tamaki following shortly after. And not seconds later the door opened, and a yellow caterpillar-like person entered the room by crawling over to the podium. *C Caterpillar Sensei. Tamaki thought only to realize it was a man in a sleeping bag when he stood up and peeled off the sleeping bag. Very few people seemed to have noticed their mysterious sensei's entrance, as most were wrapped up in their own little worlds. The very tired man glared as he scanned the room, pausing when his eyes landed on himself and anyone else who noticed him. One of his eyes twitched as his classmates continued to be ignorant of his presence. "If you're just here to make friends, then you can pack up your stuff now," the man announced, silencing most of the room. "Who are you, you damn hobo?" one guy asked, making the man's eye twitch again. "It took you all over 5 seconds to shut up. That's not going to work. Time is precious. Rational students would understand that," the man sternly told the class, then shot a glare at the partially vulgar student. "And to answer your question, I am your teacher, Aizawa Shouta," he gruffly added. Scary. Tamaki despaired in his mind. He'd never be able to speak to that man. Aizawa-sensei proceeded to dump what Tamaki recognized as UA's P uniforms from the times he watched the sports festival with Mirio onto the podium. "We shouldn't waste any more time, so put these on and meet me outside," Aizawa-sensei instructed, and immediately left the room right after. After a second of silence, the vulgar student scoffed and went back to his phone, with a couple of students following his example going back to what they were doing before, while others questioned whether that hobo was their teacher. His partner didn't do either and stood up before heading over to the podium to search through the uniforms. Tamaki faltered for a second, then timidly followed the reptilian up, and he was surprised when the boy stopped and asked, "What's your name?" Tamaki fumbled for a few minutes before he managed to stutter out his last name. The boy nodded with another odd reptilian hum. "Miyake," he replied before offering Tamaki a uniform. Upon taking it, Tamaki noticed a little tag on the inside with his last name and first initial *T. That's why he asked, "But why did he give me his name? Does he want me to help him find his?" Tamaki thought, turning to the pile, was about to start searching, but the loud, bubbly girl approached them with the other girl. "Whoa, do you guys really think that Aizawa guy is our teacher? Bubbly exclaimed, and his part Miyake nodded. His name is listed as our homeroom teacher online. Miyake replied as he pulled out a massive uniform that was surely his, and Tamaki felt a bit embarrassed that he had forgotten they could check their teachers online on the official UA website. Come, we don't want to keep Aizawa-sensei waiting, Miyake said, wrapping his tail around Tamaki's waist, which caused him to squeak. Then Miyake began dragging him out of the classroom. WYW, what are YW where? Tamaki tried to speak, but embarrassment had his vocal cords in a stranglehold. The locker rooms. Miyake responded, apparently understanding what he was trying to say. They moved through the halls for a bit, with Miyake sticking his tongue out occasionally. They were joined halfway to the locker rooms by the two girls, who quickly introduced themselves as Hado and Haya before they both had to leave to get changed. It was a bit awkward seeing as there was no private stalls except for the showers, but it was only a brief blip. Miyake and the girls were waiting for him outside the locker rooms, and as soon as he came out, Miyake took him by the wrist using his tail, then again began leading him around. Tamaki felt a bit embarrassed being led around like a child, but he didn't want to make a fuss about it since Miyake seemed to know where was going, plus he had no idea what he'd say if he did. Upon going outside, they found Aizawa-sensei was waiting for them, and he checked his phone upon seeing them. 5 minutes. Passable for first-timers, but you all should work to cut that time down by half, Aizawa-sensei told them, marking something down on the clipboard he was holding. Miyake nodded, then led them all over to where a white line was. Wow, Aizawa-sensei must be super strict if he's timing us changing, Hado commented. Yeah, Haya agreed. Tamaki also thought that, but Miyake was quick to voice his disagreement. Heroics is a dangerous and serious field regardless of the branch. It's better to learn not to waste time before it would cost someone their life. He told them blankly. Ah, I guess you're right, Miyake-kun. Hado awkwardly laughed. Considering their teacher was only a few feet away, none of them had the courage to strike up a conversation, especially since Aizawa-sensei only became more agitated when the rest of their classmates hadn't come down. It took another 3 minutes before half of his class came strolling out in their pea gear. 8.5 minutes is an unacceptable amount of time to take in heroics, where every second counts when it comes to saving lives. I expect you all to shape up if you want to keep your spot in UA, much less the hero course, Aizawa-sensei scolded, much to the arriving students' shock. Go line up with your classmates over there, Aizawa-sensei ordered, cutting off the students' protests while pointing in their direction. Most of their classmates were grumbling as they did, but obliged. Some even went as far as to shoot them some glares. Mainly the mean girl glared at Tamaki. After another minute, Aizawa-sensei looked more than agitated. Wait here while I check on the rest of your class, he instructed, stalking back into the building. Geez, what a hard ass, a boy spat under his breath, with many agreeing with him. The rest of the class feeling safe to chat now that he was gone, but Aizawa-sensei wasn't gone long, and he returned alone. Now that everyone is here, we can get started with your quirk assessment test, Aizawa-sensei informed them. What? What about orientation? A guy with antennae protested, along with a third of the class, including Hado, making Aizawa-sensei scoff at them. If you want to make it in the big leagues, you can't waste time on pointless ceremonies, Aizawa-sensei sternly recommended to them, quieting their classmates. I don't know why they're surprised. The test was listed in the curriculum, Miyake commented, shocking the three. What? Really? Hado cried, and Miyake just nodded. Aizawa-sensei cleared his throat, and they quickly turned their attention back to their teacher. As I was saying, the Ministry of Education's attempts to pretend that we're all created equal are completely irrational. So, to accurately gauge your potential, we'll be doing the same physical exam you've done since you were children, except you'll be allowed to use your quirks if you can find a way to use them to your advantage, Aizawa-sensei explained. Most of their class seemed to celebrate that knowledge while Tamaki was sent spiraling. Tamaki had a hard enough time trying to use his quirk in regular quirk classes. How could I ever use my quirk like that in front of everyone here? Tamaki cried in his head. He was broken from his thoughts when he felt something squeeze his wrist and looked down to see Miyake's tail was still holding his wrist. "You'll do fine, Amajiki-san," Miyake quietly said to him, making him flustered being caught in his moment of despair. Tamaki couldn't focus on it because Heya hesitantly raised her hand. "Yes, Heya," Aizawa-sensei called, and she gulped. "Shouldn't we wait for the rest of the class, sensei?" Heya asked. "While UA isn't bound so religiously to tradition as other schools, we are still highly competitive and as such hold our students to high standards. If any of you can't do something as simple as listen to instructions from your teacher or be on time, UA has no qualms about expelling you," Aizawa-sensei flatly replied. Everyone fell silent at that, but Aizawa-sensei wasn't done and followed up by saying, "And since it seems most of you don't understand how serious the field of heroics is, whoever comes in last today will also be immediately expelled as well." Aizawa-sensei even gave them a wide, unnerving grin on top of that horrible declaration. "What? But you can't do that," the mean girl shouted, causing Aizawa-sensei to scowl at her. "Given UA's rules, I can expel any student regardless of how long they've attended if I feel they aren't fit to stay in the hero course, understand? If any of you have a problem with that, you can head home now," Aizawa-sensei corrected, silencing the class once and for all. "I'm going to die," Tamaki thought, his hand unconsciously squeezing Miyake's tail for comfort. It was a habit he'd developed since he and Mirio became friends, and if he wasn't too busy worrying over how he was going to be expelled on his first day, he would have been beside himself with his embarrassment. Tamaki ended up spacing out for a while until Aizawa-sensei called out, "Miyake," and he only knew that because Miyake's tail released his wrist. Tamaki watched Miyake walk over to Aizawa-sensei and was marginally surprised Miyake was taller than their teacher. Aizawa-sensei gave him a baseball that looked tiny in his large hand and then walked over to the pitch. The activity was simple. Throw the ball as far as you could without leaving the circle. There likely wasn't much Miyake could do here given his quirk was an obvious reptile mutation. His size also did him no favors given the circle wasn't meant for people of Miyake's height. With this in mind, Tamaki was not expecting Miyake to swallow the baseball, and judging by the gasps he heard from the rest of his classmates, no one else did either. And before anyone could question Miyake on what he was doing, the boy crouched down, barely fitting inside the circle on fours with his nose in the air. Then somehow, Miyake hacked the ball up with enough force for it to shoot high in the air. And if that wasn't enough, when the ball was heading back down towards him, Miyake leaped, turning mid-air to strike the ball with his tail, sending it flying with a loud crack before landing back in place within the circle. For a minute, Tamaki's mind wasn't focused on anything other than staring at his large classmate, wondering how he had come up with such a plan. Tamaki was also surprised and maybe a bit happy it had worked out so well for the boy given he couldn't see the ball anymore. 185.3 meters. Aizawa-sensei proclaimed, shocking just about everyone except Miyake, who simply nodded and went back to his place beside him, his tail automatically wrapping back around his wrist, making him wonder if Miyake was doing it to comfort him in some way. The boy seemed to read him pretty well, but on the other hand, Tamaki might just be easy to read. His anxiety wasn't subtle after all. Asterisk and no, bad Tamaki, focus on yourself. What am I going to do? Tamaki mentally scolded himself, trying to focus his mind on planning something for when he was eventually called up. Fortunately, there were 4 more people that were to go before him, so he had a little time, but not enough as Aizawa-sensei called his name far too soon for his liking. "Do you want me to walk you to the pitch?" Miyake offered when Tamaki didn't immediately walk over. A small part of him wanted to take Miyake up on that, but he gulped and just shook his head. Stiffly, Tamaki forced himself to move close to Aizawa-sensei, then held his trembling hands out for the baseball. Tamaki didn't have the courage to dare raise his head, knowing that he had at least 15 people watching him, and it made his nerves so bad that when Aizawa-sensei dropped the ball into his hands, he fumbled for 3 seconds, almost dropping it. God, it's bad enough I have to deal with that cowardly thief being in the same class. Hopefully that hard ass will see reason and expel that clumsy idiot." The mean girl hissed under her breath to the girl next to her, but Tamaki still heard it with his famously elven ears, along with a third of the class whispering similar things about him. "Is there something you want to share with the class, Takahashi?" Aizawa-sensei pointedly asked, silencing his classmates' "No, sir." She replied, frowning at him. Aizawa-sensei stared at the group before turning back to Tamaki. "Amajiki, go up to the pitch." Aizawa-sensei instructed, his tone slightly less stern than before. Tamaki moved over to where he was supposed to go and tried his best to pretend that there wasn't anyone watching him. Didn't work, but as Mirio always told him, it was the thought that counts. Suddenly Tamaki remembered the treat his friend had given him, and he tried to manifest a pair of spinnerets in his hands. It took him a moment, and he could only make one in his right hand, but that should be enough. Sitting down, Tamaki focused hard on trying to make non-sticky webbing. Tamaki struggled as he never tried anything like this before, but he managed to find some scrap of determination and made a passable, if very poorly made, sling. Tamaki felt a bit proud of himself, but overlooked that and placed the ball inside it. His heart raced as he swung the swing around and around before letting it go. Tamaki watched the ball getting smaller as it traveled further from away from him, feeling like his heart was going to bust out his chest to follow it. It was hard, but Tamaki thought he could see when it hit the ground, and a few seconds later Aizawa-sensei looked at his phone. 60.5 meters. "Return to the line, Amajiki, so we can move on to the next test," Aizawa-sensei informed, and Tamaki didn't hesitate to comply, returning to where he was before. "Woo! That was a great throw, Amajiki-chan," Hado cheered, jumping in place, and Tamaki ducked behind Mieke's towering figure away from everyone else. It wasn't that good," he mumbled. "Especially in comparison to Mieke's. It was still better than mine. I only got 22. Heya commented offhandedly, trying to be encouraging, which only made Tamaki bury his face in his hands. The other 7 tests went by with mixed but similar results, though Tamaki did pay more attention and also saw Hado and Haya's turns this time as well. Sometimes they would manage to use their quirks for a better score. Haya had used her quirk to somehow make an electric arrow that was solid enough to use as a pole vault to get further in the jump test, something he also did somewhat good at since he had the leftover rabbit stew Tagata-san made last night for breakfast. Tamaki just had to marvel at how Hado dominated the stamina course, only coming behind Mieke since she hadn't paced herself, though she didn't seem very hurt by it. If anything, she just cheered Mieke on for his last 2 laps. Other times they just couldn't do much with, or without their quirks like sit-ups and toe touch. But Tamaki was managing a lot better than he thought he would have since he had some more experience with using the limbs of a rabbit. The only real downside was that the mean girl, Takahashi, was getting even more livid with him as he continued to do alright at the tests, even though she didn't seem to be making any real effort. By the end of it all, Aizawa-sensei, instead of calculating their scores, and just showed them their places on a big electronic board. He scoured the board for his name starting at the bottom, and was surprised his name wasn't down at there. Timidly, he looked a bit higher, and found his name gently sitting at 8th place. "Hey, I got 3rd, and Mieke-chan got 5th. Woo-hoo!" Hado cheered, hugging Haya, who had gotten 10th. Haya huffed and grinned, "And look who's dead last," she said, pointing to the bottom, and looking back at the board. Tamaki saw it had the seething Takahashi, though the girl was trying to pretend she wasn't. "Takahashi, gather your things and meet me at the principal's office," Aizawa-sensei said after giving them all a few minutes to see the board, and Takahashi went pale along with most of the class. "Why, you were serious, Aizawa-sensei?" Haya questioned, equally shocked only to receive a raised eye from Aizawa-sensei. "I'm not going to waste anyone's time by entertaining the delusions of a child that's going to end up in a body bag on their first day in the field," Aizawa-sensei coldly answered. "That's all for today. The rest of you can find your school-provided materials back in your desks. Takahashi, I will be waiting for you at the principal's office to call your parents and get your expulsion filed," Aizawa-sensei instructed before leaving them all to their own devices. Some of their classmates nervously looked at each other, asking each other if that really just happened, while a couple of girls tried to comfort Takahashi since she began sobbing loudly. Tamaki didn't think he was as surprised as most of his classmates because Aizawa-sensei did not look like the type to joke about anything. He certainly wasn't as surprised as Hado and Haya were. Oh my gosh, he's actually expelling someone. We could have really been expelled if we didn't do well. Hado exclaimed, her hands holding her cheeks, and Haya didn't look much better. Miyake tilted his head at their reaction, and Haya noticed how unaffected the tall boy was. Miyake, did you know Aizawa-sensei was being serious? She asked. Miyake blinked. Yes, Aizawa-sensei has the highest expulsion count of all the staff listed on the website. Why wouldn't I think he was serious? Miyake replied, and the three of them paled. Ah, I see, Haya said, looking greatly unnerved. Asterisk, how am I going to survive a year with Aizawa-sensei? Tamaki whimpered in his mind, feeling his soul already leaving his body as he predicted the stress he was going to endure just from being in the same room as the strict man. Tamaki was jolted back into reality by Miyake's tail tugging his wrist, and the boy began to pull him along with him. Miyake-san, Tamaki said, let's get changed so we can get our stuff. Miyake flatly responded, and since Tamaki didn't remember where to go, dutifully followed him. Oh, Miyake-chan, Amajiki-chan, wait for us. Don't leave. We haven't traded numbers yet. Hado cried, running after them. Come on, Haya-chan, she added, grabbing Haya's wrist and dragging the girl along. Me too, Haya exclaimed, baffled, and Hado laughed. Well, duh. How are we going to be friends if we can't talk to each other? And of course, I'm definitely going to need your number since we are going to be best friends. Hado told the girl as if it was obvious. We are? Haya said, and for once Miyake looked just as shocked. Well, Tamaki thought he was since Miyake stopped walking. Yup, it's official. The four of us are definitely going to be friends, and you are going to be my best friend, Haya-chan. So, the rest of you can just call me Nejire-chan from now on, okay? Hado declared with a wink. Oh, okay, Haya awkwardly said back, clearly lost on what to do and just going along with her. Tamaki could sympathize considering he had resigned himself to being dragged around by Miyake. Sure. Miyake offhandedly agreed and continued on to the locker rooms, making Hado squeal. Yes, first day, I made 3 friends. Ooh, do you think Tagata-chan will be my friend too, Amajiki-chan? Then I'll have 4 new friends. We should go ask him now. Amajiki-chan, you know which class Tagata-chan is in, right? Hado rambled on as she bounced with each step, hyping herself up. Tamaki was only saved from answering her questions because Miyake pulled him into the boys' locker room where she couldn't follow. Tell me if she's bothering you, Amajiki-san, and I'll do something about it. Miyake promised before leaving for the showers. Tamaki squeaked out, standing there greatly confused. Did he just make friends? Him? Oh, Kami, what was he going to do? Mirio did all the work in their friendship, so how was he going to manage friendships with 3 other people? He couldn't handle things like this. Kami, help me. He prayed. Dabi woke up scowling and covered in sweat as he felt his body twitching from his cramps. The cramping was normal, but it only got bad like this on certain days. Days when he could feel his quirk burning under his skin in a way that it might as well be boiling his blood with how awful it made him feel. He wasn't exactly sure what caused it, but he suspected it had something to do with not using his quirk enough because it only happened after long periods of minor use. Endeavor was sick, and nothing would ever change that. However, that did know somewhat how to manage a quirk like his, and Dabi was too burnt out from overuse after his training for it to ever build up, which wasn't much better now that he thought about it. Stupid quirk screwing with my head, making me think there was anything good about that. He thought, forcing himself to sit up, which almost made him pass out since days like this left him lightheaded. It didn't help that he tossed and turned last night, so he hadn't gotten nearly enough sleep to deal with being awake. Still, Dabi had a job to do, and he wasn't going to let his stomach threatening to empty itself keep him from doing the shit he needed to do that day. So he forced himself to his feet and stumbled to the bathroom for a quick shower, hoping the cold from the water would clear up the fog in his head. It helped somewhat, but Dabi didn't expect the water to magically cure all his problems, and he threw on some clothes before moving to the kitchen and found Red already had a bowl of cereal ready for him. "Oof, rough night, hun?" she questioned when she saw him, something like that. He mumbled as he opened up a drawer to get himself a spoon, only to be confused when he held a whisk instead. "One to the left," Magni commented, and Dabi quickly remembered that yes, the silverware was in the other drawer. "Right, I knew that," he responded, putting the whisk back and grabbing a spoon, then slumped in his chair. "Hey, hun, are you feeling okay? You're a bit pale." Magni inquired, leaning back against the counter. "I'm fine, Red, just didn't get enough sleep," Dabi told her. Magni didn't look convinced, but wasn't going to push it. "If you say so, but it's a Thursday, so feel free to tap out if you can't work today," she reminded him before going to take her own shower. Dabi sighed, feeling a headache beginning to form, and did his best to shovel his cereal into his mouth. As the day went on, Dabi's body made its protests of working loud and clear. He even had to stop and hold his head in his hands, counting down from 10 over and over again as he waited for one of his legs to stop spasming, unable to keep going until it stopped, or he would have tripped himself up. Thankfully, no one had stumbled upon him during that time. He did not want to deal with Red worrying over him or the Twinkie's bedside manner. He didn't need either of them wasting their time worrying over him over something that he's been dealing with for as long as he could remember. It would pass just as it always would after a few hours, a day at most if it was one of the real bad ones. Dabi was an adult now, and he could deal with the problems his quirk caused him like an adult, so he didn't need anyone babying him. Maybe if he was a bit less jaded, he'd appreciate them caring enough about him to worry. But he could be safe in blaming his donor for screwing his mind up like this. Finishing up at Quinn's, Dabi felt like his head was pounding, and the smell of the grilled meat the old fart had given him made him gag. He handed it off to someone as soon as possible to keep himself from throwing up. The kids seemed happy to take it off his hands, so Dabi didn't linger any longer than necessary and was swiftly moving on to Charlotte's. He was just passing the shrine when his headache went from a general pounding sensation to a piercing spike being drilled between his eyes, and he was feeling more lightheaded. He paused to lean against the shrine's borders, but he had misjudged the distance and fell. Dabi hissed, struggling to push himself to sit upright, and the stinging in his palms didn't keep his arms from cramping up. "Dabi, are you okay?" someone asked, kneeling next to him, and even through his foggy days Dabi could remember whose voice it was, and he cursed his quirk out for failing him at that moment. Of course the Twinkie would see that. He snarled in his head. "I'm fine," Dabi spat, trying to smack the brat away from him. Normally this was when the brat would dodge him and try to convince him to go with him to one of the back rooms. So Dabi was not expecting it when the Twinkie instead grabbed his wrist, making his arm spasm unexpectedly. "No, you're not," the Twinkie told him, not letting go of his arm despite Dabi trying to tug it free. "So what? I've been dealing with this crap since I was 8, and I don't need you babying me, Twinkie," Dabi snapped back, using his quirk to heat up his arm. It made the fog in his head worse when he used his quirk at all in this state, but right now, he just wanted the Twinkie to let him go. The brat's nose scrunched up, but he didn't let go of him and instead tightened his grip on Dabi's wrist. "Then stop acting like an idiot and tell me what's wrong," the Twinkie said right back at him, apparently unbothered by the heat Dabi was extruding. "Did you forget your brain today? If you don't let go of me right now, I'm going to burn the crap out of your hand." Dabi spat more frantically, trying to get the boy to release him. "I'll let go if you promise to do one thing for me, no questions asked," the Twinkie calmly replied, not having any trouble keeping Dabi's very hot wrist in his hold. Dabi wanted to scream at the kid for being so dumb, but bit his tongue, knowing that attracting any attention would just get him killed by the locals 5 times over for hurting their precious Deku-Sensei. However, when the horrid stench of burnt flesh hit his nose, Dabi's mind was made up for him. Okay, "Just let go," Dabi exclaimed, and though the brat did, it was too late, and Dabi quickly turned away and emptied his stomach on the sidewalk. Given his lack of appetite, it was mostly just stomach acid, which Dabi was unsure if that made it worse or not. He felt a hand rubbing soothing circles on his back and guessed it was the brat, and once Dabi was finished the boy offered him a hanky which he used to wipe his mouth. "Feel better now?" the brat asked, and Dabi was tempted to say he was but decided to be honest and shook his head no. "Okay, Dabi, I'm going to put something on your wrist, so don't fight me," the Twinkie instructed before he reached into his messenger bag and pulled out an odd bracelet. Dabi was reluctant but held out one of his arms, and when the bracelet was around his wrist, he felt a small jab making him jolt. "Twinkie, what the?" Dabi exclaimed, but the brat shushed him by putting a hand on his mouth. "Just wait a minute, okay?" the boy told him. Dabi reluctantly did as the brat asked. After about 10 seconds, Dabi felt something odd happening to his quirk. It was cooling down. That couldn't be right. Dabi has known his quirk for years, and it would never cool down this fast without Fyomi or his mom to cool his body. Was it being affected by the bracelet? "What is this?" Dabi asked, feeling much better now that his quirk wasn't burning him up from the inside. "It's a quirk band," the boy replied. Shocking him, "What?" he dumbly responded, "because what the hell? Why would the brat just be carrying around a quirk band of all things?" Dabi ended up on the receiving end of an unimpressed look. "You haven't been subtle with your problems, Dabi, and as a licensed quirk counselor, all of it was painfully obvious to me," the Twinkie answered, and that felt like a stab to the gut. "I don't have a no," the brat snapped, cutting him off. "Your legs just gave out from under you, and you vomited all over the sidewalk because your quirk was cooking you alive. Do not think of telling me you don't have a problem, Dabi," the Twinkie no Deku sternly said, just short of glaring at him. With his head clearing up, Dabi was fully able to feel the effect of Deku's intensity and flinched back. That sinister air had only grown worse since they met all those months ago. Or maybe Deku wasn't using it in full effect that time because he was tired. After a moment, Deku took a deep breath and the aura dispelled with his exhale. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have snapped at you, Dabi, but this really is serious, and if we don't do something, your quirk is going to kill you," Deku explained somberly, and he looked equally troubled by what he'd said. Dabi froze at that, and his mouth opened then closed. Are you serious?" Dabi questioned, and almost regretted it when he saw how grim it made the boy. "Nova Smith is the most famous case of how improper quirk training can kill someone. But I can assure you there are hundreds of people who've died because they couldn't control their quirks, regardless of the nature of their quirk. There's a reason that free government-funded quirk centers exist, Dabi, and that quirk counseling is mandatory in schools," Deku answered, trying to stress the seriousness of what he was saying. Dabi was going to say that didn't apply to him because he did know how to control his quirk. He could turn it on and off without problem. He could control the output, and he could even manipulate the flames when he launched them forward. But Deku raised his hand. "I know you can control your quirk, Dabi, but that doesn't mean you weren't trained wrong." The boy told him. "What do you mean?" Dabi questioned, not following, and Deku sighed. "For the most part, your training was fine. Whoever trained you followed the correct steps for training the average person with a fire quirk," Deku explained, and while Dabi wasn't the smartest person when it came to quirks, but he could understand a person's tone just fine, "and I'm not the average person," Dabi said, distantly remembering what Deku told him about his quirk when they met, and Deku nodded. "And you're not the average person. You have an antithesis quirk, and because of that means you couldn't start off the same way as anyone else. Since you have ice resistance, Dabi, you should have been put on quirk blockers and then slowly weaned off them in order to help your body properly adjust to your fire. Because that didn't happen, that's why you are still experiencing the same side effects inexperienced children with fire quirks do, if to a far more intense degree," Deku elaborated, straying from using the more scientific terms Dabi knew the boy could have used. Dabi frowned and his eyes trailed down to the large scars covering his arms, dragging all his memories for all the pain he went through because of his quirk, of the years shambling around like a zombie because of his quirk, of the tortuous hours spent training with Indihor regardless of his condition. Is that really why I wasn't perfect? He thought, unable to finish the question even if it was just under his breath. He jumped when Deku suddenly took his hands in his. The way you were trained is the main reason you are having problems, but there is one other reason why your quirk is causing you health problems. Deku told him, lightly rubbing his hands. My quirk is burning me from the inside out. What else could it be doing to my body? Dabi asked, unable to help venom in his tone. It's a common misconception that people with emitter-type quirks don't have different dietary needs, but that is rarely the case. I'm sure you know how ice and fire quirked people need to drink more water to balance their bodies out, right? Deku brought up and Dabi nodded. Endeavor was always thirsty when he got off of work. But fire-quirked people also need to keep a high-sodium diet to help all that extra water work right and to help your body properly protect itself from your fire. Deku explained, and Dabi's face likely showed his confusion given Deku quickly added, You need to eat more salt, Dabi. Oh, Dabi said. He hadn't known that. His donor never mentioned anything like that. But then again, all of their food was taken care for them by their mom, and Indihor hired them a chef after she was sent to the loony bin. And after he ran away, Dabi had more important things to worry about than the way food tasted so different. Deku let go of his hands and reached back into his bag, pulling out a small white box with a black top. He opened it, then pulled out a little white cube. Here, I want you to try this. Deku said, offering him the cube. Dabi looked the cube over suspiciously. And just what is that? Dabi asked, and Deku suddenly looked sheepish. This is a salt lick. Mutation stores sell them for people with animal quirks, so they can get their minerals easier. The boy explained. Dabi had no idea why that would make him nervous. This was probably something he didn't understand because Indihor wouldn't teach him anything outside of what was needed for heroics. Though Dabi had to admit he was curious just what it would taste like. He ate a teaspoon of salt because Natsuo dared him to once, and he wanted to know if it would be like that. So decision made, Dabi took a cube and popped it into his mouth. Asterisk, huh? It's not that bad. Asterisk, Dabi thought, not minding the sharp taste as he rolled the cube around in his mouth. Deku coughed into his hand after a moment. Well, Dabi, I want to help you gain control of your quirk. So please, let me help you. Deku requested, bowing his head to Dabi. Dabi found himself uneasy with the thought. The request had hit the root of his problem with accepting help. His donor had given him far too much help in Dabi's opinion. His mom had tried, but she could never help him the way he needed. And his sibling needed someone big and strong to give them the care they would never get from either of their parents. Things weren't much different after he left home. People offering help just weren't to be trusted. Magni had to strong-arm him to let her take care of him most days, and he didn't have any of that history with Deku. Letting the kid fix him up was one thing, as Dabi could argue. It was something self-serving, as keeping him healthy kept Deku from having to find someone to replace him. But this was different. I'll have to think about that, Dabi told the boy, deciding it wasn't a question he wanted to deal with today. Deku sat up and nodded. That's fine. Please keep the quirk band on though, and I can give you the name of the shop I got the salt lick from, Deku said, offering him the box. Dabi mulled the thought over, then took the box from him. Fine, but I'm going to keep working today, Twinkie, Dabi told the boy, forcing himself to his feet. It was shaky, but he managed to stay upright. Deku frowned but conceded, Okay, just be careful, Dabi. Your body is going to need time to recover, Deku advised. Dabi waved him off. It's like you told Red, tripping like that is nothing compared to what I've been through, Dabi said. Then he continued on to Charlotte's. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through What If Villain Deku Became a Teacher at UA. I hope you found it interesting. A big shout out to Bloomer Bill for crafting such a compelling story. Don't forget to check out their profile on fanfiction.net for more amazing works. The link is in the description below. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to Zenin Fanfics for more fascinating explorations into the world of fanfiction. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we're always excited to hear your thoughts and suggestions in the comments section. See you guys in the next video.